Today I'm going to discuss when you should not be stretching your hip flexors. What's going on, everybody? How you doing? It's Blake Bowman here with Gorilla Zen Fitness, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about stretching of the hip flexors, more specifically when it's actually dangerous and very disadvantageous to do this. To begin, stretch the hip flexors is a very common phrase nowadays. You can hear everybody from yoga instructors to personal trainers telling people to do this. Now, it's important to actually know what that means, okay? So the hip flexors are actually a group of muscles, predominantly like in the front and adjacent to the front of your hips here. They run down your legs. There's another one inside your belly called the iliopsoas. And what these muscles do is they flex the hip, meaning they pull the leg bone up like this. Now, when your hip flexors become very tight and shortened, okay, when the hip flexor muscles shorten up, what they will do is they'll typically tilt the pelvis forwards or anteriorly, okay? So when you have really tight hip flexors, it produces something called an anterior or frontal tilt of the pelvis. Now, that's something that's pretty common. The hip flexors can become shortened like that as a result of excessive sitting. And if you have that going on, then stretching of the hip flexors will actually be very beneficial to you. It'll help to correct the anterior pelvic tilt, and it'll help to bring some length to those muscles, the hip flexors, that are, shortened. I made a quick video for you on how to tell if you have an anterior pelvic tilt. I put that in the description down beneath this video, so make sure you check that out. Okay, so far we talked a little bit about what the hip flexors are, what they do, and what can happen when they become short, okay? And if they are short, stretching them will be good for you. However, if you have the opposite of an anterior or a frontal tilting of the pelvis, like this is the front and this is the back. If you have the opposite of that going on, where your pelvis is actually tilted backwards, okay, kind of like this, it's rotated this way, okay, that is called a posterior pelvic tilt, okay? And if you stand like that naturally with a posterior tilt in your pelvis, then actually stretching the hip flexors will be very harmful to your body. Let me explain this. Basically, the opposite of anterior or frontal tilting of the pelvis is posterior tilting of the pelvis or backwards tilting of the pelvis, and both are equally as common. Now, the reason why it's dangerous to actually stretch the hip flexors if you stand naturally in a posteriorly tilted pelvic position is because just by having your pelvis tilted back like this, the hip flexor muscles are not shortened like they would be if your pelvis was tilted forward. They're already lengthened. They're already too long and weak. Literally, when you're actually doing stretches for the hip flexors, you can make the stretch more effective by posteriorly tilting the pelvis. So if you're standing like that naturally, then the hip flexors, like I said, are already going to be stretched and too long. Now, this can produce a feeling of tightness, okay? And oftentimes people will feel this and they'll think that they're short and tight, and then they'll stretch the hip flexors. But that tightness is really coming as a result of the muscles being pulled too taut, okay? So they're tight because the two ends are being pulled away from one another. It's like grabbing a rope from two different sides and pulling on it in opposite directions. Yeah, the rope is going to be tight and taut, but it doesn't need to be stretched anymore. It feels tight because it's overstretched already. So basically, if you stand naturally with a posterior pelvic tilt, which is the opposite again of that frontal tilt, if you have that frontal tilt, that arch in your back will be excessive, your gut will be sticking out. If you have the opposite of that, where your pelvis is like tucked underneath you like this, you have a very flat low back. Okay, if you have that going on and you stretch the hip flexors while you have that, you're stretching on a muscle that's already overstretched in the first place. Over time, this can damage the muscle and lengthen it even more, allow your pelvis to posteriorly tilt even more, which is just going to cause a plethora of different issues and injuries in the future. Maybe you have this going on. Like I said, oftentimes people with this posterior tilt of the pelvis will feel tightness in their hip flexors, and then somebody will tell them to stretch their hip flexors, and they'll do so not knowing that the tightness is coming from the hip flexors already being overstretched, okay? So people in this situation will typically have to continuously stretch their hip flexors, and their problems won't get any better. They oftentimes usually get worse. So they'll overstretch their hip flexors, and that will kind of create a little bit of inflammation in there, make them feel even more tight. Then the next day they stretch them some more. They get stuck in this cycle of going in the wrong direction towards fixing their problem. Just remember this. If you look at yourself in the mirror and you see that the front part of your pelvis here is like higher up than the back of your pelvis, and your low back has like no curve in it, then you probably have a posterior pelvic tilt, okay? And if you do not want to be stretching the hip flexors. I hope this video was helpful for you. This is a topic that I've wanted to, address for a long time here. So if you like this video, then go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel right over here. Also, if you want to learn more about posture, not just pelvic posture, but how to improve your pelvic posture and the posture of your upper body, then make sure you pick up my free ebook, Posture, the Ultimate Life Hack. You can get that book by clicking over here. Basically, when you click this, what this will do is it'll take you to a page on my website where I'll ask you for your email. And as soon as you enter in your email, I'll send you your copy of my book, Posture, the Ultimate Life Hack, within 5 minutes. Now, if you're watching on mobile, then that link probably won't work for you, and you'll have to open up the description down beneath this video and click the first link available there. That link down there, as well as this link, will take you to the same page on my website. Lastly, if you want to hear me speak about anything specifically that you can't find a video on, then let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to like this video and give it a, share it to your friends, and I'll see you next time.